As this reflection gently comes to rest, it may help to remember that distance is not meant to be a permanent state of separation, nor a decision to remain alone indefinitely, but rather a transitional space where your inner world is given the time, quiet, and protection it needs to rebuild a sense of safety that may have been worn down by years of overextension, adaptation, and emotional vigilance. This does not mean disengaging from the world, but choosing to meet it from a place of integrity rather than immediacy, where fewer words carry more truth, and silence is no longer a void to be filled, but a container that protects what is real. In this quieter rhythm, you may notice how often you once adjusted your tone, softened your truth, or shortened your response in order to fit into conversations that moved faster than your inner processing, and how distance now allows you to honor your natural pace without apology. It is based on real-life experiences and personal growth journeys, shared to invite awareness, not conclusions. You are invited to take what resonates from this reflection and leave the rest behind, trusting that understanding unfolds in its own time, and that you do not need to rush toward answers or decisions in order for growth to be taking place. There is no need to hold a role in place, no pressure to be consistent with an old image, and no urgency to react before you have fully felt what is happening inside you, which allows your internal experience to remain whole rather than fragmented by the need to perform understanding or emotional readiness on demand. In the next reflection, we will gently turn toward that experience, exploring when being strong becomes your biggest wound, not to diagnose or resolve it, but to understand what it has protected, and what it might be asking for beneath the surface. We encourage kind, respectful discussion and constructive comments. Distance, in this sense, becomes a form of protection for your inner truth, a way of safeguarding the parts of you that require time, stillness, and privacy in order to exist without distortion. It is in this rebuilding that distance reveals its true purpose, not as an endpoint, but as a necessary passage that supports healthier, more sustainable forms of connection, ones that honor both individuality and intimacy. By allowing yourself this distance, you are not rejecting others, but giving yourself the chance to construct a foundation that is anchored in self-respect and emotional regulation, making it possible to engage without losing clarity, balance, or authenticity. In the space that distance creates, something subtle yet essential begins to take shape, because without the constant pull of expectation, interpretation, or immediate response, you are no longer required to compress your inner world into versions that are easily received, quickly understood, or socially convenient. This shift can feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you are used to being responsive, adaptable, and emotionally tuned to others. Yet over time it reveals how much of your previous presence was shaped by external cues rather than inner alignment. Understanding this can help reframe withdrawal not as a personal failure or a lack of relational capacity, but as an intelligent response from a system that is seeking balance, rest, and a sense of internal safety that has been difficult to maintain in close contact. As your inner truth is preserved rather than diluted, you begin to sense a steadiness that was previously interrupted by constant self-adjustment. And this steadiness becomes the foundation from which more authentic connections can eventually grow. As distance gently enters your life, you may begin to notice that it creates a rare kind of freedom, one that does not come from separation itself, but from the absence of expectation, where you are no longer required to perform a role, maintain a tone, or respond in ways that are socially acceptable rather than emotionally true. Being less present externally often leads to being more present internally, as the absence of constant interaction gives your thoughts and emotions the room they need to unfold honestly, without being shaped prematurely by others' expectations or emotional reactions. As you remain with these thoughts, another question may begin to surface quietly, one that explores what happens when resilience becomes a habit, when strength is carried for too long without rest, and when being strong starts to feel less like empowerment and more like a wound that has never been allowed to heal. This content is for educational and reflective purposes only. By allowing yourself this space, you are not becoming less connected, but more intact, because you are no longer sacrificing authenticity for accessibility, or depth for immediacy. From this place of inner safety, future connections are more likely to arise naturally and organically, shaped not by fear of being misunderstood or abandoned, but by mutual curiosity, patience, and a shared willingness to meet one another without performance or pressure. Without the constant presence of others, the pressure to be quick, agreeable, or emotionally available begins to soften, allowing you to slow down and respond from a place that feels grounded rather than reactive. Because there is no longer a need to manage impressions or adjust yourself in real time. In this quieter space, you may find that your thoughts unfold more honestly, your emotions move at their own pace, and your sense of self becomes clearer, as if distance has removed the background noise that once made it difficult to hear what you actually feel and need. Showing up less often does not mean withdrawing from authenticity, but rather choosing it more carefully, because when you do engage, you are no longer operating from habit or obligation, but from intention, bringing a presence that is truer, steadier, and less fragmented. In preserving this internal honesty, you create the conditions for future connections that can meet you where you are, rather than where you were expected to be, making distance not an end, but a necessary step toward a more genuine way of relating. When you step back, time stretches in a way that feels unfamiliar at first, yet deeply grounding, because you are finally allowed to respond slowly, to pause without explanation, and to let meaning emerge organically rather than forcing clarity before it is ready to exist. This phase is not about turning away from connection, but about turning inward long enough to restore trust in your own signals, rhythms, and boundaries, so that closeness, when it returns, does not feel like something that must be endured, managed, or survived, but something that can be entered with steadiness and choice. Being around people can begin to feel like entering a space where you must constantly monitor the emotional atmosphere, anticipate reactions, and adjust your own expressions in order to avoid misunderstanding or tension, creating a subtle state of vigilance that keeps your body and mind from fully relaxing, even in moments that are meant to feel supportive or intimate. In this way, distance functions less as avoidance and more as regulation, a natural survival response that prioritizes stability and safety over proximity, especially when connection has repeatedly been paired with stress rather than ease. In this state, connection becomes associated with effort, because your system remains partially activated, ready to respond, explain, or protect, and over time this low-level activation accumulates, leaving you feeling tired in ways that are difficult to trace back to any single interaction. There comes a point when connection no longer feels like a place of ease, warmth, or spontaneous presence, but instead begins to carry a subtle weight, as though every interaction requires a certain level of preparation, awareness, and self-management that was not there before, making closeness feel less like rest and more like something that must be handled carefully. When connection begins to demand this level of internal effort, it gradually loses its restorative quality, because instead of leaving interactions feeling nourished or grounded, you find yourself feeling slightly drained, tense, or unsettled, even when nothing overtly difficult has happened. And slowly, almost without you noticing, your system begins to favor that sense of safety, teaching you that stepping back can feel more regulating than staying close. Especially when connection has become something that must be managed rather than simply lived. This relief does not come from isolation itself, but from the reduction of emotional stimuli, expectations, and the need to stay attuned to others' inner states, giving your system the space it needs to reset and recover. Over time, this creates a quiet tension that lingers beneath the surface of closeness, where even moments of intimacy are accompanied by a subtle alertness, as if your nervous system is scanning for signs that you might need to explain yourself again, defend your boundaries, or step back to prevent discomfort. When you find yourself pulling away from others without a clear reason you can explain, it is often not a conscious decision rooted in logic or preference, but a quiet response from your nervous system, which has learned through repeated experience that closeness requires a level of emotional alertness that is no longer sustainable. When you step back and create distance, something shifts almost immediately, as the absence of emotional demands allows your nervous system to slow down, your breath to deepen, and your internal rhythm to return to a pace that feels manageable, safe, and familiar. This pressure is often invisible to others, because from the outside you may appear calm, composed, and engaged, while inside you are constantly adjusting, checking, and recalibrating, making sure you are not saying too much, not feeling too deeply, and not disrupting the emotional balance of the interaction. In this way, distance is not chosen out of fear or avoidance, but recognized by the nervous system as a form of relief, a quieter environment where the constant background tension of being on can finally soften, allowing you to breathe without the pressure of being understood in the moment. As this pattern repeats, your body and mind begin to associate closeness with effort rather than ease. And without any conscious decision, distance starts to feel safer, more predictable, and less emotionally taxing, offering a space where you do not have to perform, adjust, or hold yourself in place. What once felt natural and flowing can start to feel monitored, where conversations are approached with caution, words are chosen deliberately, and emotional responses are adjusted in real time, not because you want to hide who you are, but because experience has taught you that being fully yourself may lead to misunderstanding, tension, or the need to explain things that feel obvious to you on the inside. In these moments, connection stops feeling light, because instead of simply being present, you find yourself carrying an unspoken responsibility to clarify your intentions, soften your reactions, and adapt your tone in order to fit into expectations that may not have been openly expressed, yet are deeply felt.